First of all, I'm not calling you, dear audience, wrong and stupid, unless you are YouTube creator Stuart Hardy, also known as Stubagful, who told me to make this video, in which case you are wrong and stupid.
So Luke, I dare you to make a video essay with this specific title. Why About Time is one of the greatest films ever made and you are wrong and stupid, Stuart Hardy.
So About Time turned 10 years old last year, and my love for this underappreciated rom-com has been called weird by basically everyone. My love for About Time has led to interviewing my hero, holidaying around the key locations, hosting 78 episodes of a podcast, and somehow meeting Elton John. So, it's fair to say I like this film and I'm qualified to make this video. If it were possible to get a degree in About Time studies, I'd have that degree. Maybe I'd teach the lectures. Lockdown made us all do very crazy things, and in 2020, as the huge About Time fan that I am, I hosted a podcast dedicated to a detailed analysis of About Time. Each episode was around half an hour long, and each episode was dedicated to 2 minutes of the film. If this analysis isn't enough for you, then you can find that show as 2 Minutes About Time on all good podcast platforms. I'll be using some clips, segments and interviews from that show throughout this video to further some points. In this video, I've also teamed up with some of the most talented musicians I know and asked them to re-record different songs from the About Time soundtrack to score this video. After watching this, I highly recommend you check out all of their stuff and even listen to the full versions of their tracks below. I'm aware that some of you will probably have not seen About Time, so I'll pre-warn that there will be spoilers in this video, but let's begin at the beginning. To an instrumental version of Ben Folds' beautiful song, The Luckiest, Tim introduces us to his family. He begins with himself, citing himself as too tall, too skinny, and too orange. In this opening shot, Tim is wearing a similar shade of green to the walls of his house. This instantly suggests to the audience that he is comfortable and at home.
Yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of time, on every job with the costume designer. So how I tend to work is I put the entire film up on the wall around the art department. So scene by scene, how each set is introduced and how the colours are introduced, and then as everybody adds to that, Liz starts to find the dressing and the decor that's going to be in there, and colours start to emerge, so a colour scheme starts to kind of appear. And then as the costume designer starts to do fittings, what we tend to do is kind of try the different costumes on the wall alongside all our ideas for what the sets would be. And I mean, sometimes it's a compromise from either side. Sometimes we end up sort of compromising the colours. Sometimes the costume designer compromises them. But yeah, it's definitely something that's always really considered. I mean, for my money, I always like costumes to fit into a world rather than to stand against it. So I really like colour on colour. I think that works. Or pattern of one colour in a costume against a plain colour in the background of the same colour, and I think I think it helps to really bed characters into their world, which is, in the case of About Time, was really important. It needed to feel like every environment you in was somewhere absolutely loved to within an inch of itself, and whether it was Tim's room or the dad's study or Mary's apartment, and later their house that they had together, where we went for this kind of childlike colours as they had their children. We it was the same ideas and same discussions happened with the costume designer as well, to make sure that it is.
JP has this brilliant lookbook. I remember your lookbook, JP, with all your thousands of pictures, and you had lots of reference from Irish country houses, I seem to remember, and at that time people were getting married, and it was like multicoloured costumes for all the grooms, and suddenly everyone had umbrellas that were pink, blue, green, orange and blue, and it was just that, I remember focusing a lot on the wedding and that Cornwall feel and sort of that handmade, everything had a real life to it. So I think that was really important, and we kind of brought all that into all the different characters, really.
I won't go through all of these introductions, as there is a reason I did a whole podcast on this film. But through them, he introduces his mum, his dad, his uncle Desmond, and his sister Kit Kat. But I'll talk next about how he introduced his dad.
Dad, well, he was more normal. He always seemed to have time on his hands. After giving up teaching university students on his 50th birthday, he was eternally available for a leisurely chat or to let me win at table tennis.
To the first-time viewer, This introduction doesn't seem like anything special. However, Tim's dad has the ability to travel back in time, as we'll find out in about 5 minutes' time, and yet he still wanted to retire at 50 and spend more time with his son, despite having, quite literally, all the time in the world. His dad is also seen reading a book in this opening scene. This is one of 5 different books we see him with during his limited time in the film. His dad does claim that he also used his time travel ability for reading, and this serves a clear way of implying that. After introducing his family, Tim then goes on to discuss how happy and comfortable his life is, one of the most clear examples of Todorov's equilibrium theory that I've ever seen, and how he finds comfort in his repeated rhythms and patterns of his home life. It's no surprise then that the key to happiness that Tim's dad gives him at the end of the film, I told you spoilers would be at play, is to live every day twice, creating another routine and a new equilibrium that Tim can find comfort in. We then see Tim at the New Year's party. I won't spend too long on this scene as the clips I can play are limited, given that within a short scene there are 3 different heavily copyrighted tracks played. During this party we see Tim's awkwardness in full action as he fails to kiss a girl, Polly, at midnight and goes for a handshake instead. We also briefly get introduced to his friend Dodgy J and see his sister Kit Kat meet a man called Jimmy Kincaid, but we'll talk more about that later. Tim clearly regrets not kissing Polly, and in this brilliantly effective smash cut to him in bed the next morning, we can feel his regret too. If only he could go back in time and change it all.
Tim, my dear son, the simple fact is the men in this family have always had the ability to... This is going to sound strange. Be prepared for strangeness. Get ready for spooky time. But there's this family secret. And the secret is that the men in the family can travel in time.
Bill Nighy's performance in this scene is just absolutely perfect. He makes this big sci-fi reveal feel awkward and uncomfortable, instantly making us feel as though this is a very real moment. We've all watched sci-fi that makes time travel feel exciting, impossible, and ambitious, and yet Richard Curtis allows us to see it in a different light, in a way that feels the most Richard Curtis-y way it could ever feel. John Guleserian's camera work throughout the film also greatly aids in this regard, as almost every single shot is handheld, and the camera is seemingly freely moving, as if the action is live and happening in front of us, and that even the camera is surprised at certain moments and conversations and struggles to keep up. The camera feels like another character, a silent observer, and that observer is us, watching this very awkward exchange as a father tells his son about his ability to travel in time. And the way in which he travels in time is incredibly awkward and extremely mundane too. Tim has to go into a dark place, but cupboards are ideal, and close his eyes, clench his fists, and try to remember the moment he wants to travel to. When you think of time travel, you think of something that looks cool. Going into your cupboard or wardrobe is not. I can only imagine that this is what the TARDIS felt like to audiences upon first watching Doctor Who in 1963. Before the image of a blue telephone box became synonymous with the flagship BBC programme, it would have felt strangely mundane and yet exciting in a whole new way, as time travel suddenly feels that little bit more close to home. After Tim tests out his new trick by going back to the New Year's party and kissing Polly, in the original script he sleeps with Polly and then goes back and erases it, which causes a whole range of moral complexities and thus, therefore, was definitely a very good cut. Tim discusses time travel further with his father. In this short conversation, Tim and his dad quickly veto a lot of the main tropes and concepts within time travel movies. No butterfly effect, yet, not using it for money, and not using it to not have to work. This leads to only one option for Tim.
To be honest, I suppose, for the moment, it would be just great if it could help me get a girlfriend.
Wow. Massive.
Now, this is of course very dodgy grounds, and yet I do believe the following couple of scenes gives Tim a get-out-of-jail-free card for how he uses his time travel. Kit Kat's boyfriend's cousin, Charlotte, played by Margot Robbie, mere months before her Wolf of Wall Street fame, comes to stay, and Tim is infatuated by her. We're introduced to Charlotte as the camera pans up from her legs, instantly sexualising her before the audience gets to know about her personality. In fact, we learn very little about Charlotte during this film, as we see the film through Tim's eyes, and he's purely attracted to Charlotte based on her appearance. Tim uses his time travel ability to try and get Charlotte to fall for him. Charlotte rejects him in an incredibly lovely and polite way, and Tim decides after this interaction.
Big lesson number 1. All the time travel in the world can't make someone love you.
Yes, it's one line in the film that could easily be overlooked, but to me, this is Richard Curtis's way of saying that the eventual romance between Tim and Mary is real and not influenced by time travel. Tim then moves to London to pursue a law career and stays in the spare room of his dad's playwright friend Harry, played by Tom Hollander. And whilst I'm a massive Tom Hollander fan and all his scenes are a joy to watch, I'm going to jump ahead a tad. On a night out with his friend Dodgy J, Tim visits a blind restaurant and meets Mary and Joanna. A few minutes ago I spoke of the sexualisation of Charlotte and how the film focuses more on her appearance than her personality. And this is nothing new, of course, as the love at first sight trope is massive within the world of rom-coms, and for there to be love at first sight, there must first be sight. And yet, in the setting of the blind restaurant, Tim gets to meet Mary in a setting where we get to see an emotional attraction building between them before anything physical. In this interaction, Mary mentions that she loves Kate Moss. The line is said briefly and in passing to a degree that the audience could be forgiven for forgetting it. Then we finally see Mary and Joanna. This moment is kept brief, but just long enough for Tim to get Mary's phone number. And whatever anyone says, this line isn't cheesy at all and is in fact one of the most romantic lines in cinema.
I thought this phone was old and shit, but suddenly it's my most valuable possession.
It's followed up by one of the most romantic songs, Mid-Air by Paul Buchanan. And as Tim comes back home, the sentimentality disappears as Harry rants to him about how the opening night of his new play was a disaster, as one of the actors forgot his lines. Tim goes back in time to help fix Harry's play, where we get to see Richard E. Grant and the late Richard Griffiths in a wonderful cameo. At the end of the night, Tim decides to call Mary, but her number is missing from his phone. By going back to fix Harry's play, he never met Mary in the first place, and his phone is back to being old and shit. It's an absolute tragedy. The one bit of chemistry Tim has had with anyone that hasn't involved time travel, and he screwed it up. Until the following morning, in Harry's newspaper, Tim sees an ad for a Kate Moss exhibit at a local art gallery. As mentioned earlier, the audience could easily be forgiven for forgetting her mention of Kate Moss. And yet Tim, in that way that anyone who is crushing on anyone does, listened carefully to and will have replayed back in his head every word that she said. Tim waits literal days at the same spot for Mary to come. With his time travel, he's often able to change things and make them work how he wants them to work. But Tim cannot do anything here. He has to wait for his dream girl to appear again. And in his excitement at spotting her, he completely forgets that she has absolutely no idea who he is, and makes a painfully awkward first impression. Well, second first impression. Not as awkward, however, as when she reveals that she now has a boyfriend. Tim then gets the details of when Mary and her new boyfriend met, which they kindly gave for some reason, and goes back in time to then, to meet Mary first. Tim then spots Mary and uses her own words about Kate Moss, which he heard from her in the future at the art gallery, to get Mary to fall for him. A few pieces of additional dialogue from this scene actually appear in the trailer that aren't in the film.
I love your eyes.
Do you?
I love the rest of your face too. Haven't even looked further down, but I'm sure it's all fantastic.
Now, I co-hosted 2 Minutes About Time with the brilliant Robert E.G. Black, a man who watched Groundhog Day every day for a year. And so I will allow him to explain to you what we call Phil Connoring.
Phil Connoring was, I forget when I coined the term, it was pretty early in the blog. It was what he does to Nancy Taylor, where all he does is get some basic bits of information from this girl, essentially guessing that she's gonna just trust him, and it'll be enough to get her attention because that's all he needs, because he's charming. Is, you know, what's your name? Where'd you go to school? Who was your, was it 11th grade English teacher or 12th grade English teacher? Wow, I should remember that. But Phil Connoring is this idea that when you're in the time loop and you have information on someone, you can use it to manipulate them. For him, it ends up being somewhat charming because he doesn't end up with Nancy. He ends up with someone else. So it's not like he manipulated his way into an ongoing relationship where we have to treat it with that. Phil Connoring can also be done very badly. I know the Twilight Zone episode, the recent Twilight Zone, Try, is basically, what if the guy who's Phil Connoring someone is a villain? And the whole episode is this guy using information he knows about this woman to try to manipulate her. And it goes very badly. So we would hope we get the charming version from Groundhog Day, and that Phil Connering is, I know enough about you that we can get past the pleasantries of getting to know each other and just jump right into a date or whatever. He's manipulating so many things, but specifically I put Phil Connering on the dating because it was good to have a term for it other than the less pleasant term, time loop date rape, which is what some critics called it, which it also sort of is. But if you call it Phil Connering, it's more nice.
Whilst Tim is Phil Connering Mary, this differs a little from Connor's Phil Connering, as we know that Tim and Mary already had a lot of chemistry before Tim accidentally erased it all, and by the rules set in place by About Time, all the time travel in the world can't make someone love you. Mary differs from Charlotte some more as we get to find out about her job, that she's a reader for a publisher, and they discuss their respective sexiness of their jobs. Mary then initiates the first kiss. And then she initiates a lot more than that. The distinction of Mary initiating this is simple. With Charlotte, Tim suggested that they turn their friendship into something romantic. Here, it's clear that Mary feels the chemistry and that Tim hasn't forced or rushed her into anything. The time travel ability is controlling enough that if Tim were to have initiated sex, or even the first kiss, their chemistry would be at stake. Yes, Tim has manipulated their meeting on this occasion, but Mary has truly fallen for Tim, and we can see that right away. Whilst Mary initiates sex, Tim decides to relive the moment over and over again in order to perfect it, which is definitely the most problematic part of this film, and so not really something you want to think about too much. However, now seems like the perfect moment to share this extract from a conversation with renowned TV mentalist and a massive About Time fan, Derren Brown.
So what are your thoughts on the kind of placing of women in this film? It bugged me on the last viewing of it. And I say all of this, particularly if Richard's is listening. I adore it. It's one of my favourite films. So I kind of feel like within myself, I've earned it to sort of lean into slightly a couple of things that do bug me about it. Have you had this conversation about sort of...
A little bit.
Yeah, and it's sort of all in Mary, isn't it? First of all, you've got that repeated sex scene, which is questionable, I guess, and does, even at the time, I think strike an odd note for sort of both of them. And then she sort of becomes, and the sort of name Mary as well is that sort of slightly odd Madonna whole thing going on, but she seems to be there to be this sort of perfect and therefore perfectly sexually available and make babies, and it's a slightly odd thing, and it sort of also has echoes of the men know about the time travel and the women aren't allowed to know. Is this a conversation you've had with anybody? Is it
in little bits? It's worse with Charlotte, but it's deliberate with Charlotte, with the fact that when Margot Robbie steps out the car, we see her legs first. I think they've tried to not make it as sexualized with Mary in the fact that we hear her before we see her because of the dark restaurant.
Yes,
but there's still definitely something, and I think it's just because Tim's the centre of the story that we don't get to see Mary outside of how Tim views her, I guess, that it does make things a bit difficult, and I guess maybe part of it comes with the fact that, with the sex scene, it's only a few hours after she met Tim. Tim's known her for days, but in Mary's mind, it is only a few hours after, and I'm wondering whether that maybe sexualizes her character more than...
Well, it's partly that, because you get the Mary versus Charlotte, like, that kind of... And then you'd understand why she's Mary, why that makes sense. She's called Mary. You'd understand that, but then, so there is the thing of like, she's actually a bit more up for it than sort of we immediately expect. There's also just the fact that he's repeatedly having sex with her without her knowledge, which again, just within the kind of the tonal thing, which is so important, isn't it, with these kind of romantic comedies.
One thing we talked about with that is, since it's the third time they're meeting, it's like the movie's way of justifying him being able to just confront her on the third time and them having sex repeatedly. It's already set up the fact that she likes him. And so it makes it a little more acceptable as we're watching through.
If we hadn't seen her like him first before he started using time travel, then it would have been really dodgy for him to use time travel to get with her.
Through a montage set at Maida Vale Station alongside John Bowden, Ben Coleman and Sam Sweeney's cover of How Long Will I Love You, Tim and Mary go from having just met to moving in together. This montage beautifully shows the progression of time and helps differentiate this film from the majority of other Richard Curtis rom-coms. The time frame covered within this montage is normally the stage of relationships that Curtis's films are focused on, and yet this montage, less than halfway through the film, shows us that this film is different. Also, there's a man called Graham Curry.
Over the years, there's two train stations that people tend to film at all the time. One's Charing Cross. There's like a secret closed platform that, James Bond filmed at once in Mission Impossible, because you go through a door at the bottom of Charing Cross, you don't know it's there, and there's at the bottom of the escalator, there's a door and there's a platform. I think it was Jubilee Line, and it's been closed for 10 years or so. And the other one is the Aldwych one, which is a bit older. It's a bit tired, and there's no escalator. You have to walk down 300 steps, so people try and avoid that one. And when you film in a live station, you have to work within the restrictions. And generally, that's what, and you can't change it. Whatever time the last train that leaves there, whether it's 11:30 p.m. or midnight, that's when you can start. Sometimes let you do some minimal preparation, but because of health and safety, you need to wait. And then as soon as the last train goes, you close up and it's yours until the first train. And I've always liked it. I think it's very ornate. It's got a very nice, all the tiles. And I just went there, took pictures, showed it to Richard and John Paul, and they said it was great. And I think it works really well. That was the entire night just spent listening to that song on loop over and over. And suddenly the first train was like 6:30, so at 6 o'clock we were all coming up the stairs, the escalators, bringing equipment, and I never wanted to hear that song again.
Tim meets Mary's parents, and the next day he goes to see a play at the National Theatre with his friend Rory. In the theatre, Tim bumps into Charlotte and briefly stumbles into his old habits once more. Tim goes over to Charlotte to make small talk and keeps saying the wrong thing and keeps needing to go back in time to change it. With Mary, Tim seems to no longer feel the need to fix everything he says to her, and yet with Charlotte he feels the urgent need to make everything perfect. Yet this time, it works out for him. Charlotte suggests that she regrets not going out with Tim, and so she invites him back to her flat. It's often been said that 1 hour into a feature film should be a pivotal point of conflict, and 59 minutes and 57 seconds into About Time, according to the UK Blu-ray of the film, Charlotte invites Tim in. Our hero, of course, declines. This being the midpoint of the film, however, let's explore if that were different. A common criticism in negative reviews for About Time suggests that this conflict was very quickly rushed over, and Robert even misremembered this scene as going differently. So, how differently do you think the film would have played out had Tim got with Charlotte?
I think some of the beats probably would have been the exact same. Like, he still would have had the moment where he erased a child, which is one of those elements they also could have played up to show the tragic side, is have him have to deal with getting to know a new child or something. I think, obviously, the father still would have died because that's the through line of where the plot goes, like the story ends. But I think the marriage would have changed a lot, because the only way you can play that differently is that Tim and Charlotte don't do well as a couple. Like, they turn out to not really have anything in common. It's just kind of a shallow sort of crush turned into a real thing.
Yeah.
So even if they manage to, after they sleep together, do get married for whatever reason, we don't even know what is going on in her life per se. So we don't know how he fits into hers. But if they got married, I think it would have to play as their marriage isn't very good, and so it almost would be like a kind of a sitcom kind of thing where he has to hide certain things from her, or tries to use the time looping thing to figure out what she is doing because he suspects her of like cheating. It'd be this darker thing, I think, is the only way it could play out differently. And so it would change a lot of the tone of the rest of the movie, if not the actual structure.
Yes, no, that makes sense. I think the logical instant thought would be he does it and he regrets it and he undoes it, which I think would be really damaging for the audience's perception of Tim.
Exactly.
Unless the entire film were to become about that moral dilemma.
Right.
For us to just overlook that and go, oh, he's getting married now. I don't know if that's a jump that the audience would be comfortable making. It's probably the same reason why we cut him sleeping with Polly in the script as well. Like that, got changed because he was going to go back in time and undo sleeping with Polly. At which point, like, is initial consent that has then been removed through time travel still consent? Like, it's sort of like Tim's experienced that, but Polly / Charlotte hasn't. And yeah, I think we don't know what Charlotte wanted. We don't know whether like it was going to be a one night thing or whether she was like looking at Tim as a new romantic prospect. I'm thinking it's probably more the former than the latter. Yeah. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think it ultimately have to come back to like maybe he goes through the marriage, it doesn't end well, they get divorced, and then he happens to bump into Mary again. Toward the end of the story. And
that makes sense.
So that we get the implication he's still going to be with Mary anyway. So then it's like, why do we play out this bad stuff and make him seem like a bad guy who can't handle his relationship when we're better off with him making the right choice?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think what would be interesting, I guess, and it'd be a total different avenue to explore, would be like if Tim had, because obviously through him being able to redo everything, Tim doesn't really have any regrets in life. And it'd be interesting to explore the idea of a regret that he wouldn't be able to change. Yep. But I don't know how you would say that.
And they already do that with his sister. It's like him making a change and then having to reverse that change and hope for something better later. So I think we already get aspects of what would be covered by him being with Charlotte. So the structure as it is better.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And it wouldn't be the film that everyone, because to ignore the narrative side of things, everyone loves the heartfelt, sweet, idealistic nature of About Time that, quite frankly, we wouldn't be here talking about it 11 years on from the film coming out and 4 years on from doing a podcast about it, had him slept with Charlotte.
Right. Because, what makes it wholesome, and as you always described it, that warm hug thing, is that Tim, while he yearns for Polly, yearns for Charlotte, he doesn't get them because it's not that kind of story. He's supposed to find the woman he's going to be with and find her relatively early in the film, considering it's feels like a rom-com. They get married pretty early because that's ultimately not the point of the plot. It's just part of it.
Well, that's it. It's like one of the things I touched on in the video essay that people have seen like a few minutes prior to this is that the whole "How Long Will I Love You" montage, like that whole sequence of time that they're just showing in a montage, is the main period in a relationship that every other Richard Curtis film was focused on. Right. Okay, they've met, but here's the coming together, getting to know each other thing. And Richard Curtis just goes, let's just like shove like, I don't know, a year, 6 months, however long it is in time, in a montage, because that's not what this film's about. So, I guess we'd be resetting, if Tim were to end up with Charlotte as well, we'd be resetting to that early relationship stage again. And it wouldn't be a film about marriage and kids. It would be a film about the stumbling of the start of any relationship and retreading what we've been doing for the past half an hour.
I think you kind of just covered it there, is that we'd be retreading territory that's already in other movies, and specifically we'd be losing the overall structures. That this isn't about his relationship with Mary, this is about his life from essentially, as it turns out, because we see him younger, from when he's a child to after his father dies. So we get that through line. Mary's just one part of that. And if you focus on Charlotte too much, then it becomes the plot is about his marriage. So it's a very different movie.
Yeah. And I think that's where our conversations on the podcast and that have come up a few times since about how women are written in the film, and how there isn't a ton of personality to the female characters. Whereas I can definitely understand that as a criticism, and like it is an issue in general in cinema, but it's Tim's story. Like they're only relevant with him being the protagonist. the only significance of these characters are who they are to Tim.
Which you could argue that is problematic in its own way, but
yes,
it's a problem that you can accept if you accept the premises. This is his version of the story. He's telling the story, right?
In the same way that, in Bridget Jones, Mark Darcy's only relevance is who he is to Bridget Jones.
Exactly.
I think it kind of works both ways. Saying it as straight white men on a on a podcast. Yes. Yeah. And Tim, of course, decided to decline. But not only decline, but it led to him deciding to make it official with Mary, so he rushes home and proposes to her. It's a beautiful scene where the time traveller returns home as his long-term girlfriend, played by Rachel McAdams, is sleeping, and he wakes her to propose. Hang on, that's the wrong film clip. That's from Time Traveller's Wife. About Time is actually one of 3 films in which Rachel McAdams plays the spouse to a time traveller. 4 if you count Doctor Strange. Tim then takes Mary to visit his family in Cornwall, and this seems like the prime time to talk about the locations of this film. Whilst in the original script, Tim's family were going to be living in Scotland, later drafts updated the setting to Cornwall, and this feels like the perfect location to juxtapose Tim's quaint seaside upbringing with the hustle and bustle of London. Tim's family home is a place called Porthpean House, located in St Austell in Cornwall. And look, there's me. As well as Porthpean House, the film also featured other areas of Cornwall, including Vault Beach, which whilst a 25-minute drive away was used as the beach beside the house, so movie magic, St Michael Penkerville and Portlow, among many others.
It's always harder to film in Cornwall. You know, the road's a bit smaller, there's lots of people there in the summer. The beach at the house was not the beach that we used. It was called Vault Beach. But we must have scouted about 30 beaches, but Richard really wanted to use that one. I tried to put him off because it was a 20-minute walk down a cliff to get to the beach. There was no other way of doing it. And quite often you have gators and 4x4s, but at the top of there, you unload the equipment and you just have manpower and you had to walk 20 minutes down. And I knew that it was going to be hard work. That day we shot must have been about 28 degrees on that beach. We were depicting a winter scene. It was hard work. And of course everyone ran and they just leave and you've got to get all the equipment up. And it was hard work. I just ran in the sea afterwards to cool down.
As Tim takes Mary to visit his family in Cornwall, Mary has a chance to bond with Tim's mother, also called Mary, while Tim skims stones and plays table tennis with his dad. And I'm just going to let this scene play for a moment to allow you to see this beautiful exchange. As Tim is our leading man and the film is his story, the significance of each character is purely based on their relationship to Tim and how they aid his story. And this scene, and this exchange, whilst of course causing complications for a scene that would otherwise pass the Bechdel test, is just incredible.
And what are your faults? I mean, little weaknesses.
Oh, well, I'm very insecure.
Sweet.
Okay, I have a very bad temper sometimes.
Crucial. How else are you going to get a fella to do what you want?
Well, and of course I have a weakness for your son.
So do I. But best not to tell him. Don't want him getting cocky.
The two Marys talking about Tim is then very quickly, albeit briefly, paralleled with Tim and his dad talking about Mary.
What do you think of her? I like her more than you already.
Only when analysing the film in this level of detail does one realise how little Bill Nighy actually appears in the film. The sentimentality of Tim's relationship with his dad is a core theme that is hugely present and is easily the most memorable element of the film. And yet, when it comes to screen time for Bill Nighy, he's actually in the film very little. In the 2-hour runtime, Tim's dad appears for a grand total of 18 minutes. In this scene, we see Tim and his father playing table tennis together once more. They bond over the game as well as their shared love for the Italian song Il Mondo. On paper, this scene is minor and incidental, but it sets up something that is paid off greatly later in the film. Bill Nighy, when taking on the role of Tim's dad, reportedly claimed that he'd only do it if he didn't have to act, claiming that the role is very truthful and like himself. On a personal level, I feel like Curtis writes this role perfectly, leaving enough room in the character for the audience to place in the characteristics of their own father figure. This beautiful scene, focused on the relationship between Tim and his father, is cut short, however, when Tim bumps into Kit Kat on the stairs. Kit Kat seems quieter and more distant than normal, and this is the first time we get a glimpse into what's going on in Kit Kat's life. The moment is fleeting, however, as Kit Kat jumps straight into her excited mode. Tim and Mary then announce to his family not only that they're engaged, but also that Mary is pregnant. And then back at home, Mary convinces Tim to make some decisions for their wedding, by taking off an item of clothing for every decision he makes. Although she does reject his idea of her coming down the aisle to Il Mondo. And then, on a rainy day in Cornwall, the wedding day occurs, and Mary surprises Tim with the familiar sound of Italian romance. However, before we speak about Il Mondo, let's pause for a moment as we're about halfway through this video. Let's take a breather, look back on Tim and Mary's relationship up to this point, and listen to a beautiful cover of How Long Will I Love You, specially recorded by Hannah Green for this video.
How long will I love you? As long as the stars are above you. Longer if I can. How long will I need you? As long as the seasons need to follow their plan. How long will I be with you? As long as the sea is bound to wash upon the sand. How long will I want you? As long as you want me to. And longer by far. How long will I give to you? As long as I live to you. However long you say. How long will I love you? As long as the stars are above you. Longer if I may.
Now, back to the wedding. Here's what writer-director Richard Curtis had to say about the featuring of the song Il Mondo.
That song, Il Mondo, was my dad's favourite song. We went on holiday to Elba when I was young, and every night we used to go to the local town, and my dad would buy us, one ice cream, and the whole day would be about working out whether you wanted, stracciatella or caramel. But there was a jukebox there, and we put on that song every single night. So I've been wanting to put that song in a movie since I started in the movie. So it was a real thrill to have Il Mondo.
It's my ringtone now as well since doing this show. It's
and
I love it.
It was either written by or orchestrated by Ennio Morricone, the greatest. I've had an Ennio Morricone score. That's what I get.
Mary walks down the aisle in an unconventionally red wedding dress, firmly making this wedding scene memorable and not allowing it to mix with the countless other rom-com weddings you may have seen. I mean, Richard Curtis even put 4 in one movie. What follows is an insane montage of the wedding congregation trying to make their way to the reception through a major storm. And yet, rather than appearing stressful or manic, it just appears fun. Everyone, with the slight exception of Harry, is having the time of their life, and you just know that it'll be a memory the characters will cherish for years. This moment also leads to the poster of the film, as Tim and Mary hide under an umbrella on their walk back to Porthpian House. You'll be forgiven at this point for briefly forgetting that this film involved time travel. It's just been a bittersweet few scenes focused upon family and relationships and joy in the little things, like a wedding on a rainy day. And after an abysmal speech from Rory, Tim goes back in time several times to experience different potential best men before settling on his father. However, I'd like to briefly point out that during Jay's speech, when he very crudely describes how far Tim got with each of his girlfriends, one of them, number 8, is in fact a photo of Richard Curtis's daughter, Scarlett. His other children also feature within the film. Now, the next scene leads into one of my only major criticisms of this otherwise perfect piece of cinema. I love the fact that we see Tim's dad using his time travel skill as he realises he never said "I love you" to Tim. I'm a fan of all that it represents. However, I may have neglected to mention clearly, but this whole film is narrated by Tim. But it is. And therefore we're seeing this film through Tim's eyes. How does Tim know that his dad did this? Am I nitpicking? Yes, absolutely. But if I can do a detailed analysis into the bits that work beautifully in this film, it also works the other way. Also, as all the men in Tim's family can travel back in time, I feel as though the wedding is a missed opportunity for a gag based on that. With so much of the family assumedly in the same place, it'd be lovely for Tim to bump into an uncle or someone on their way to the cupboard, or open the cupboard and find a relative in there. The point isn't really a criticism as much as a missed opportunity. At the wedding reception, we also catch one more glimpse of Kit Kat's troubles as she confides in her uncle Desmond, a character that almost exclusively appears for comic effect, and therefore I had no reason to mention in this video until this point. We also see her boyfriend Jimmy flirting with a waitress, but it would be easy to miss that as we haven't actually seen Jimmy since the New Year's party at the start of the film. Either way, it's clear that the bubbly and excitable Kit Kat is not quite the same anymore. As Tim and Mary debrief upon the success of their wedding day, Tim's parents dance to Spiegel im Spiegel by Arvo Pärt, a track that's soon to become a motif throughout the rest of the film. Spiegel im Spiegel translates roughly to mirrors in mirrors, and is a musical palindrome, meaning it's exactly the same forwards as it is backwards. As it appears throughout the film, it seemingly represents the sort of melancholia as life moves on and time moves on. This interpretation is applied perfectly as we cut next to a close-up of the foot of their newborn child, Posy. In this beautiful scene, I'd like to point you back to the direction of Kit Kat's troubles.
Come on, hand over the little bugger. Let's see if she bounces.
Oh, are we sure? She definitely will bounce. She can do anything.
In this one simple line, Kit Kat is projecting her wishes onto Posy. As the childish one of the family, she seems to envy Posy's innocence, and "she can do anything" has a heck of a lot of weight to it. And a mere moment later, she does it again. Behind Tim's beautiful monologue, we hear this.
No one can prepare you for the love people you love can feel for them.
That's quite incredible. You've just slain your master.
And nothing can...
Kit Kat has her own monsters that we, as the audience, aren't fully aware of at this stage. And yet she wishes, and envies, Posy's ability to slay. It's beautiful, it's subtle, but it's flippin' powerful. Tim, Mary, and Posy move into a new house, and during Posy's first birthday party, they get a visitor. Someone that throws the joy of this film into perspective.
Jimmy! Where's my sister?
Thought she was here.
No, she hasn't arrived.
That's not good.
What does that mean?
Well, we had an argument this morning over nothing, but she'd been drinking, so... And then she ran out to get the car to come here, and I told her to meet me here, so...
Tim and Mary rush to visit Kit Kat in hospital. Tim decides to go back in time and prevent Kit Kat's accident. He can prevent the accident, but he can't prevent the actions that led to it, something that is so much more subtle than fixing an event. Kit Kat is in an emotionally abusive relationship with Jimmy, a relationship that led her into alcoholism. This isn't something that Tim can find a quick fix for. It's something that has been there ever since the start. This relationship is foreshadowed right at the very beginning. Right as they first met, Jimmy is pressuring Kit Kat into drinking things she doesn't want to. Tim can't change this. And as Mary says...
Yeah. But you know, if it's gonna be fixed, I think she probably has to do it herself.
Every film viewing experience is affected by what you bring into the film. In spite of the title of this video, there is no such thing as an objectively good film. Art is, in its very nature, subjective. Unless you're Stuart Hardy, in which case you were wrong and stupid. And what I brought into this scene made it strike a personal touch. It genuinely helped me on an emotional and personal level. As I'm sure is the case with a lot of you, I've helped friends through rough patches in their life, had sleepless nights worrying about how to help them and what I can do to fix their situation. And on one occasion, whilst I was going through something like this with a friend, I just so happened to watch About Time. I mean, it's not a massive coincidence, I do watch this film a lot, but this scene, this element of Tim's story told me what I needed to hear. I can be there for someone, that is important, but I can't fix things. That isn't the responsibility of the friend, it's the responsibility of the individual. This helped, it truly, truly helped. And all from a little movie about a guy who goes into his cupboard to time travel, written by the co-creator of Mr. Bean. Kit Kat may be slaying her monsters, but About Time slayed mine. Recently, I was lucky enough to have a conversation with Richard Curtis, where he spoke of the song Neverending Happening by Bill Fay, and how, had he heard the song before making the film About Time, he definitely would have featured it somewhere. He claimed that the song covers exactly what About Time is about, and so as I was partway through making this video at the time, I felt like I had to feature the song in some way. So I'm very grateful to the brilliant Sarah Ralten, who has especially recorded this cover of Bill Fay's song.
Astonishing to me, the never-ending happening of waves crashing against the cliffs, the falling sea the wind carries, the never-ending happening, souls arriving constantly from the shores of eternity. Astonishing to me, just to be a part of it is astonishing to me.
However, Tim still tries to fix it for Kit Kat, of course, and this leads to another one of my very limited complaints with this film. He tells her the family secret, and he takes her back in time too. Nothing in this film before this point suggests that this is possible, and Tim shows Kit Kat as though he has 100% certainty that it would work. All this needs is a little throwaway line like, let's see if this works, and I'd have no problem at all. However, all is forgiven by the time you reach this moment, where Kit Kat punches Jimmy and Tim's dad gives a look that shows he knows exactly what went on. When they return back to modern day, things have changed and Kit Kat is now dating Jay.
There was something about the whole storyline with her that I didn't quite... I loved her at the start, as I guess everybody does. I mean, you know, she's such a lovely, adorable character. And I liked, in retrospect, the way that you start to see her kind of start to sort of break down a little bit. You just get a sort of a whiff of it at the top of the stairs at one point, don't you? And then
She's the subway montage. Yeah, we get an idea something bad is happening.
Yeah, that something's wrong. But there was just... I think maybe it's the fact that her story doesn't... Apart from giving us the detail about you can't go back before the birth of your child, it somehow seems a thing that doesn't really help the story, and it's always slightly left me cold. I always feel I haven't really connected with it as much as I feel that I should.
I love this sequence because I think its disconnect from the rest of the film works to the theme of the film, which is he stopped paying attention to Kit Kat when he got a life. And so he missed. She was in London. She went back home and he didn't even know until he happened to see her there. And then suddenly she almost dies and he has to realize he needs to look after everything around him that he cares about. And he told us at the beginning of the film she's one of his favorite things in the world.
But Kit Kat's new boyfriend isn't the only thing to have changed. When Tim returns home, Posey is not Posey anymore. She is, according to the end credits, now Boy Posey, according to Tim's dad.
But the exact sperm at the exact moment got you this particular baby, so if you do anything the tiniest bit different, you'll have a different child.
So, every day up till yesterday is as it will always be. Lost.
Just like for everyone else.
So all that Tim and Kit Kat did has to get undone, and Kit Kat has to have her accident, so Tim can have Posey again. I kind of feel sorry for Boy Posey, as what on earth happened to him when he got erased from existence? I mean, I can't imagine that's nice. Now, this video has been very positive about Time, obviously, as it is the greatest film ever made. However, now it's time to hear from someone wrong and stupid, so here's Stuart Hardy telling us why he's wrong and stupid.
About Time is a film about a lonely, sensitive rich kid called Tim being told by his father that the men in their family have the power to go back in time. And Tim uses this power to engineer his love life. While About Time hasn't seemed to have made a huge impact on audiences, I was only barely aware of it when Luke told me it was his favourite film, but I've mentioned it to other industry type people and I found it's weirdly popular specifically among industry type people, particularly with men in this sector. I think it might be because creative types are typically lonely, distant people imagining an idealised romantic view of life, which is very much a story as opposed to what a relationship actually is. Because that's essentially what About Time is, isn't it? It's a fairy tale romance for lonely, sensitive men. As fun and funny as the premise of What If RomCom but with time travel is, and it is cleverly constructed, I did start to feel uncomfortable with Tim engineering events to construct his relationship with Mary. The main thrust of Act 1 is that he can't save this play from being a disaster and get together with Mary. If he does save it, he never meets her, and now she has a boyfriend. So he has to go back to before she met this boyfriend and change that around. And this turns me off specifically based on my own experiences of relationships. I don't like the idea of romantic games or the idea that love is this hidden set of calculations that you have to work out behind your loved one's back. I like it when people are honest and open with each other about their intentions. About Time is wish fulfillment, sure. What if you had the power to make it so you definitely got with the girl of your dreams? Because sure, real life usually does get in the way and it does require some calculations. But this factor did start to make me kind of hate Tim as a person, because he never seems to think that there's anything wrong with what he's doing. Tim doesn't really change that much over the course of the film. His life changes, sure, but as a person he's basically the same at the end as he was at the start. Also, later in the film where his sister Kat's having problems and gets in a car accident, Tim attempts to intervene with his powers and go back and change things, but in doing so it means his daughter was never born. That's actually what the entire plot of the film could potentially be about. Cause and effect is central to almost every time travel story ever, but it's treated as an afterthought here, as is Kat herself. Same with Mary. The film is so much about Tim and his powers that I never really felt I knew who Mary and Kat were as people, or what they wanted. I feel like the women in this film are treated less like characters and more like props to be reshaped by Tim so that he can learn almost sort of half lessons about himself. When surely women have got their own thoughts and feelings too, right? I have been led to believe that on the most part women do basically want the same things out of life as men. It's a fun little fairy tale, sure, and not all films have to have characters that I necessarily approve of, but just don't play games with your significant other, yeah? Just treat them the way that you'd want to be treated. Just be honest.
To jump ahead a little now, Tim and Mary now have another child, Jeff. And after a very light and comical scene of Tim feeding back on Mary's dresses and Posey accidentally ruining Mary's manuscripts, the tone shifts brilliantly.
What is it? How can I help you? Oh, Mary. No, everything. Sorry. Your son will explain. It's your mother.
Hi, Mum. No, it's okay. No, we'll come straight down.
The silence used here is incredible. After such an intense, comedic yet stressful scene, the juxtaposition of pure silence is powerful. And deep down, you've kind of already guessed what that call may be. And here we go.
Hello, darling.
Mum, how are you?
Honestly?
Why not?
I am fucking furious. I am so uninterested in a life without your father.
Now that line was powerful. Incredibly powerful. Tim's mum's an incredibly controlled and serious woman. In the beginning of the film, Tim called her busy and unsentimental. And yet that line is so full of sentiment. This is so significant and out of character for her. I'd even call it the greatest use of strong language in film history. Now, that word is used incredibly sparingly throughout the film, and that means that Lindsay Duncan's delivery has even more weight behind it. Curtis's sparing use of strong language gives that so much more impact. As a writer myself, every time there's strong language within an emotional scene that I write, I can't help but try and compare it to the impact of Lindsay Duncan's delivery here. It, of course, will always fail in comparison. But bad language wasn't always used sparingly within About Time.
You know, my movies have been, I think, rated R in America. Mm-hmm. And I thought that About Time, someone came to me and said, if you can limit it to, I think it was either 8 or 12 swear words, we can get a lower rating. And I said, well, that is going to be unbelievably easy because this is not a sweary movie. Mm. And I said, just go away and count and then I'll see what I can do. And someone came back the next day and said there are 72 words. So I thought, well, that I'm not going to be able to do it again. One of the things there's a kind of feeling that studios are bad and filmmakers are good, but I remember the conversation about Love Actually where they said to me, you know, we'll probably make $50 million more if you cut the naked couple. And I said, let's not. And they said, fair enough. You know, so I've been quite lucky that what I wanted, I got, rather than what the money people wanted, they got.
Tim's dad has cancer. And here we are hearing Spiegel in Spiegel once more. Tim goes to talk to his dad about this and, well, I'm just going to let this scene play.
How long have we got?
Oh, you know, it could be years.
How long, really?
Weeks, I'm afraid.
Have we had this conversation before?
Yeah.
What happened?
I rather let myself down. I hugged you.
Tim's dad tells him a secret. A big secret. A secret so big that it's hidden from us, the audience.
Tell me. Let's save some time.
John Guleserian brilliantly shoots the conversation from outside the window, expressing how personal and private this conversation is. Tim does, however, tell us part one of the two-part plan, that he'll just live each day like everyone else. And we get a lovely montage of a day in Tim's life. And then comes part two.
He told me to live every day again, almost exactly the same. The first time with all the tensions and worries that stop us noticing how sweet the world can be, but the second time, noticing.
And during this montage, we hear a song. A song called Gold in Them Hills, written and performed by the brilliant musician Ron Sexsmith. Here's what Ron had to say about the writing of the song.
Well, with Golden Hills, I wrote it right after, I wrote it I think in 2000. My family had just fallen apart, and I was single for the first time in years, and I was living with my accountant, and everything was sort of crammed into one bedroom, and I was kind of a little bit depressed. So I was trying to write a song that would make me feel better, and I was thinking of those old Depression-era songs that Bing Crosby used to sing, like Pennies from Heaven, or Accentuate the Positive or something. So that's where the song came from, and I kept playing this riff on the piano, and the only lyrics I could think that went with it was Gold in Them Hills, and I always thought, well, that's not very good, but I'll change that later, once I get the verses. And it was just sort of, I don't know, it just sort of popped into my head even before I had any other lyrics. And but it all came pretty easily once I got on a roll with it. And it was actually the very first song I ever wrote on the piano, which in itself I was kind of proud of, because I'm still a lousy piano player. But anyway.
So was that like a hit near as soon as when it came out, or what sort of following?
It wasn't like a radio hit, but the thing that happened with that record is, I struck up a friendship with Chris Martin from Coldplay on my previous record, and so when they were mixing the album in Los Angeles, Chris stopped by the studio, and unbeknownst to me, he sang on it. He sang the second verse, and so the record company, obviously, because it was Chris Martin, they're very excited about that, and so we did a video with me and him in it, and we did a couple tours around North America. But the song never got a lot of radio interest. But in Canada, it was number one on one of the video channels, just for the video, for some, which I thought was kind of strange. But it just became one of my most requested songs, and people like Katie Melua covered it, and as well as others. So, but it wasn't like a hit. But the older I get, it becomes more like one of, in my own universe, kind of a hit, right?
And the other special thing about this song is a very personal experience of mine. Thanks to having Ron on 2 Minutes About Time, I was chatting with him on Twitter afterwards and sent him a video of some of my friends from the school that I'd just left doing a cover of I'm Still Standing by Elton John. I just wanted to share my friend's music with a musician that I look up to. What I didn't know, what I couldn't expect, was that Ron knew Elton John, and a very short while later I get a message from Ron saying Elton loves it, have you got an email address for the school? And a couple of weeks later, this happens.
Hi everyone, this is Elton. I had an email from a dear friend called Ron Sexsmith, who's a great singer-songwriter from Canada. He sent me an email and said, you've got to look at this clip of these guys singing I'm Still Standing. Well, I looked at the clip and I was completely blown away. In fact, I watched it 3 times in a row because I couldn't believe how good you sang and played it. I mean, it's not an easy song to sing and certainly not to play it. So I just wanted to send you all my love and say, you know what? You really cheered me up. And I know it's been a rotten time for all of you because everything's been cancelled because of coronavirus. But you know what? You did something brilliant and you made a brilliant version of I'm Still Standing. And I want to thank you so much for it. I hope you all have a great career and music plays a big part in it because you certainly got talent. And I promise you, when I come to England after all this is over and actually play a gig, you can all be my guests at my show, all right? Because I loved it so much. Ben, you did a brilliant job. Guys, thank you.
And then this happened.
Over the past few months, many of us have been using music to help us get through the pandemic. Students at the Telford Priory School have been recording music videos for their YouTube channel, which might not sound that unusual, but they've attracted a very famous fan.
Sir Elton John surprised students at a school in Telford this week by sending them a personal video message to praise their cover of his classic song, I'm Still Standing.
So he sent a video message to the group after seeing their rendition of I'm Still Standing, saying he was blown away, that it really cheered him up.
And then this happened. And then this happened.
The audience tonight, I want to acknowledge and dedicate this song to Vince, Amir and the boys, the Telford Music Studios, music students, who in the lockdown, when we were in lockdown, they put up on the internet or whatever it is, a version of I'm Still Standing, which just made me feel so good, and it blew me away because it was so good. They're here tonight. Thank you guys for doing this. To Josh and Archie, and to Michael and Lynn, this is for you.
yeah, that's fun. Anyway, about time. Fun fact, the woman who serves Tim in Pret-a-Manger during this montage actually served Richard Curtis, and he just invited her to be in the film as he felt she had the right charisma.
When we were filming Cornwall, we were there for a few weeks and filming, and there was a restaurant, a really nice restaurant in, I can't think where it was, Foy, I think it was. And I went there on Sunday with my family. Richard came in with his family and, you know, had a nice meal. He was at the other end. And anyway, it was a really nice restaurant. When I came back to London and we did the London filming, we did that scene in Pret-a-Manger. Richard said he wanted to film in Pret-a-Manger, so got a contact with them. It took a while. And anyway, we ended up, because we were filming in the Royal Courts of Justice, that we used the one opposite. And we're setting up prep, and there was the girl in the uniform. And I was like, where is she from? I know her. I just know this girl. I couldn't think what it was, and then found out that when Richard left the restaurant, he asked the girl on the reception of the restaurant to come up and be in the Pret scene.
And then came the scene we'd all been expecting to come. To the tune of Into My Arms by Nick Cave, the characters we've come to know and love prepare for the funeral of Tim's dad. And just as Lindsay Duncan's fury was effective a few scenes prior, Tom Hollander's delivery here is just perfect.
Right. Are we ready for this?
Of course we're not. Hateful day.
Harry's been a very angry character throughout the film, to great comic effect. And yet, the way he says hateful while downplaying the emotion is just perfect. It brings chills to me every time I watch it. With the power of time travel, Tim pops by to see his dad just before the funeral. The conversation's not profound by any means. In fact, it's fairly mundane, as Tim's dad reads him an extract from Great Expectations. But with this film, it's the mundane that means the most. The relationship is real, beyond any sci-fi level, and that's the core element of the film that people recall and relate to. Tim is lucky in a way that the audience are not, in that death doesn't have to affect him personally, apart from his own. He can go back to see his dad whenever he likes, and sustain the relationship beyond the constraints of mortality. That is until, on the night of Tim's dad's funeral, Mary asks Tim if they can have another baby. And Tim says yes. We smash cut to Mary heavily pregnant and lying in bed with Tim. Donald Gleason's expressions in this brief moment are incredible. He somehow manages to portray the bizarre mix of joy of having another child combined with the sadness of never being able to see his dad again. And the attempt to hide that sadness, get this man an Oscar. Just before the child is born, Tim goes back to see his dad one more time, and they play table tennis. Tim lets his dad win.
I won! I haven't won in years.
You finally got good.
What's my prize, apart from the Olympic gold medal, of course?
A kiss will have to do.
A kiss? A kiss? Oh. I get you. This is it, then.
This is it. It's my last bit of extra time.
And here comes the bit that everyone remembers. Tim and his dad go back to when Tim was a little kid and they play on the beach together. One last trip. Now, the very fact that Tim and his dad can go back to this day without changing anything in the present does, of course, kind of ruin the reason why he can't see his dad ever again. It is a gaping plot hole within the film. A major one, but do I care? No, I couldn't give a damn. When his dad says,
But there is this one thing. A quick little walk. Totally against the rules, of course, but if we don't change a thing, if we're very careful, it shouldn't do any harm.
I see it as a simple explanation to not think about it anymore. The scene is beautiful and powerful and lovely, and it makes me tear up, and that is all that matters. Is About Time a perfect film? No. Is it the greatest film ever made? Well, yeah, but you could have got that from the title of this video. During this wonderful scene, alongside Richard Curtis's son, Charlie, playing young Tim, we hear Nick Laird-Clowes' About Time theme, A beautiful and powerful piece of scoring that aids the scene perfectly. Here's what Nick had to say about it.
At one point, they hadn't got anything for the scene with the funeral, and it wasn't sure that Nick Cave was going to be there, so I'd written this piano piece and I played it, and the music supervisor said, "Is that yours? That works." And then Nicky Kentish-Barnes came in before Richard and heard it and wept. Got to keep calm here. And Richard came in and they went, he's written this lovely thing. And Richard listened to it and he went, it's nice. But, that was it. We moved on. As the film went along, my little piece of piano was in it and stayed in it. And then Nick Cave, they agreed, and that, so then it was out from that section, but it was still in another one. But that Richard wrote me quite quickly after that. Now I knew that one thing. He wrote to me about the beach scene, and he said, the beach scene is the scene that we have to get absolutely right. And you have to write nothing less than the greatest, most heartfelt piece of music you've ever written in your life. So no pressure then. And that loved Richard.
And by heck, you did it.
Well, you know what, Luke, that's too nice. Because what I thought was, I just thought, I'm not going to feel any pressure because I think I've already written it with that About Time thing, one that I'd written for the funeral. And I thought, I think I've already done it. But as the way films are, I wrote 4 new ones for it, and we always made them fully produced so that Richard could really see them and watch them against it. And one of them, it's worth it because one of them became Goulburn Road, became the bit, when they go back for the day, and he goes back and he's in court and the wig. And suddenly Richard said, what about putting that in this? And I said, oh no, it's too good. It's a theme. It must be throughout the film somewhere. And he said, let me watch it. And they watched it. He said, it's got to have it.
We conclude the film with a montage of everyone now. Kit Kat is with Jay, and they have a kid now. The family have adjusted to life without his dad, and Tim and Mary have a new child. Finally, Tim gives us these final words of wisdom.
The truth is, I now don't travel back at all, not even for the day. I just try to live every day as if I've deliberately come back to this one day, to enjoy it, as if it was the full, final day of my extraordinary, ordinary life.
Live in the moment. It's a cliched message, but it's an important one too. And not one that you come to expect from a time travel movie. And that's it, I guess. I love this film. It just means the world to me. It's a warm hug, it cheers me up on days when I need it, and it's become an integral part of my being. I may lose all respect in film circles for citing Curtis instead of Kielowski, but if those are circles wherein this isn't considered to be cinema, then I don't think I need their respect. I'm Luke Allen, and that is why About Time is the greatest film ever made. And you, Stuart Hardy, are wrong and stupid.
I don't get many things right the first time. In fact, I am told that a lot. Now I know all the wrong turns and stumbles and falls brought me here.
We're all travelling through time together, every day of our lives. All we can do is our best to relish this remarkable ride.
Where was I before the day that I first saw your lovely face? Now I see it every day, and I know that I am the luckiest. What if I'd been born